The proposal between the two parties began long before anyone stepped into a meeting room or issued a public statement. It started in whispers, quiet exchanges behind closed doors, guarded conversations where every sentence carried weight, and moments where loyalty, pressure, and political instinct collided. By the time both sides finally agreed to sit down and structure their proposal, too much had already happened for it to be a simple negotiation. There was history in the room. There were wounds. And above all, there was power, royal power, political power, the kind of influence that shapes headlines and divides communities. On the first side sat the delegation pushing for accountability, transparency, and structural reform. They believed the situation had reached a point where silence would only deepen the cracks. They wanted a process rooted in justice, one that could reassure the public that the kingdom was not drifting into chaos. Their proposal was built like a foundation stone, firm, uncompromising, and designed to set a new standard for how internal disputes and royal controversies should be handled. Their spokesperson spoke with sharp precision, referencing protocol, past incidents, and the urgent need for stability. It wasn't aggression, it was insistence, the kind that rises from frustration after being ignored for too long. Opposite them were the king's defenders, the loyalists whose purpose was not simply to speak, but to protect. To them, this proposal was not just a document, it was a test of allegiance, a measure of whether the throne could still command respect. They viewed the reformists' push for accountability as a direct challenge to the authority of the king, a subtle but unmistakable attempt to weaken the royal household's voice. Their counter-proposal reflected this belief. It emphasized unity, respect for tradition, and the importance of managing disputes internally rather than in public arenas, where narratives can be twisted and political enemies can feast on royal disagreements. As the two proposals were placed on the table, the atmosphere shifted. Even the silence carried meaning. Words became instruments of negotiation, and every suggestion felt like it was balancing on a knife's edge. One party argued that transparency was the only way to preserve the monarchy's dignity, in an era where every secret eventually leaks. The other countered that exposing internal matters to external review was itself a risk, potentially leading to misinterpretation, opportunistic attacks, or a weakening of ancient structures that had held for generations. Yet beneath the formal language, a more emotional battle was unfolding. The reformists were driven by concern that repeated controversies were eroding public trust, and that if they didn't act now, the kingdom might face an even deeper crisis later. They spoke about the future, about how young people were questioning traditions, and how the monarchy needed to adapt if it hoped to stand strong in the years ahead. But the loyalists carried a different fear, the fear of losing the essence of the kingdom. To them, too much openness invited chaos. Too many changes invited opportunists. They believed stability came from protecting the crown, not exposing it. Their speeches were filled with reminders of heritage, of the ancestors who built the institution, and of the symbolic weight the throne carried for millions. Slowly, the two proposals began to overlap in certain ideas, suggesting that perhaps cooperation was possible. But then a single phrase would reignite the tension. A clause about disciplinary procedures, a paragraph about oversight, a sentence hinting at external review. Each time progress appeared within reach, it slipped away again, as if the proposals themselves were wrestling for dominance. The discussion stretched late into the evening, long past the point where formalities faded and raw truth began to surface. Voices lowered, eyes sharpened, and the realization settled in the room that this was not merely a negotiation about paperwork. It was a negotiation about the future of the kingdom itself. Would it walk the path of modern accountability, or would it reaffirm the protection of its oldest traditions? By the time both parties rose from their seats, the proposals remained on the table, neatly printed yet carrying the weight of everything that had been said, and everything that had been held back. The kingdom now waited for the next move, unsure whether the proposals would bridge the divide or deepen it. Everyone sensed that whatever decision followed would define the next chapter of the royal household and echo far beyond the palace walls. Click the subscribe button, because more is upcoming. You will know everything to the final solution.